for about 20 to 30 years, people have been using prolotherapy and then PRP, which is a kind of prolotherapy. So prolo means proliferative, or basically they put like sugar in there, hypertonic sugar, and it caused, we think, cellular damage. So that damage brought in inflammation, which brought in stem cells to repair the inflammation. And the way they do that is by secreting these exosomes.
Hi, Edward. Welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot, Sherry. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for making the time. And a couple weeks ago, I was on Gaia, which is one of the channels that I like to subscribe to. And I watched an amazing little interview with you. And I learned a lot about stem cells and about certain topics that I thought I had a pretty good understanding around. But what I was the most fascinated with is really understanding that we could also implicate aging working with stem cells and working with telomeres. And I know you have a deep passion for this. So before we get into it, I think just to maybe make it a little bit more basic, maybe we could start around how did you get into this? Why is this such a passionate topic for you?
Yeah, I mean, I was practicing medicine, and my father, almost 20 years ago, got brain cancer. So I thought, oh my God, people get sick and die. Why is that?
Hmm.
So I looked into it, and the thing that made sense was telomeres, they're the ends of chromosomes. So every time a cell divides, the telomeres get short. So basically, we're just made up of cells. They come from stem cells. So when your mom and dad got together, there was one stem cell, the fertilized egg. And so you have, various trillions of cells now, but there are certain types of cells called stem cells. And as we get older, we lose those, partly because of telomere attrition or the telomere shortening. But they did a great study a few years ago on a Dutch lady, 114 or so, and she only had two out of like 10,000 left of her immune producing cells. So life is a journey, and if we can sort of ameliorate the way in which the cells are mutating and how fast they're being depleted. And now I have friends like in Costa Rica, you can pay him a bunch of money, he'll try and replenish your stem cells. These are the basic facts of what causes us to get old and sick.
Hmm. Okay. So again, coming back to your deep passion, you just shared with me offline before we started talking, and what I also love about just our conversation offline is you're so intriguing because you're almost 60, I think,
Yeah.
and you look like you're in your 20s, which is insane. And then you shared with me your journey since you were in your 30s, and you've been taking telomeres, I think, throughout
Yeah.
this whole entire time. So maybe even get into that. What about your personal journey into why this is so important for you?
Well, I have two kids, one just graduated college and the other one, so I got to stay around and, pay for that. But it's been fun. Over the last 17 years, every night I take a telomerase activator. And as I go, I just last week at a conference with anti-aging gurus I've known up to 17 years, and they're starting to get older. Some have passed away.
Mhm.
So I think that for whatever reason, this one and only thing I've taken has just flattened out the curve. So I don't have really any gray hair on my head, or and I don't need reading glasses. I can read 3 inches away. And I just think that's just one third of the aspect. The interview I did with you is a theme I sometimes come up with, meaning 5 dimensions of aging. So if you look at stem cells, there's maintenance, which is Vishnu. And I think the telomerase has kept me maintained. The telomeres haven't gotten too long, but they haven't shortened. So that means the rate at which I'm aging is abnormal,
Hmm.
normally slow. But then stem cells is Brahma in the Vishnu Brahma Shiva trilogy, or that's our stem cells are always getting depleted, even a woman that has eggs, the time of her most fertile eggs was in utero, actually. And after you hit 35, the egg quality is decreased. So the last thing is Shiva, which is self-suicide or destruction. There really hasn't been a lot of great products for that, but people take things like curcumin, and I guess they do things to help. But those are the first 3 dimensions, and then time, and then entropy.
Hmm.
So entropy is something I've gotten more into. You know, you have these epigenetic clocks. I don't know if you heard it. They'll send blood and they'll tell you how old you are, and hopefully. So basically, in addition to the hardware of the cells and the DNA, there's a software. So there are switches that you can throw on the genes to turn them on and off. it's called acetylation and methylation. So every time a cell copies, it tries to copy the software too, but
Hmm.
that's a little more than 100% efficient, I think. So as we go through life, the entropy or the additional silencing happens, and that's why cells themselves can act funky, even if their immediate predecessor was okay. The software can be over silencing all the genes.
Right. And what you're talking about here is the environmental factors, right? So the hardware is what's maybe passed on, right? That's what
Yeah.
we see as the DNA, but according to epigenetics, it could be modified depending on the environmental factors. So how does
Yeah.
that fit in?
Well, on a more basic level, like you buy a computer from Best Buy or whatever, or the internet, and then it's got software loaded. It's usually Microsoft Windows, right? So if you're going to clone that computer, you clone what's on the hard drive. That's the software.
Right.
But cells do this too. So on the most basic level, like if you're a muscle cell in the heart, right? Although it's a bad example, but your daughter, if you're a stem cell there, is going to have all the switches turned on and off to tell your daughter how to be a muscle cell in the heart. So that's
Mm.
good. But yeah, no, people have done experiments with epigenetics, and what you're referring to is like, oh, intergenerational trauma and stuff like
Mhm.
that,
Yeah.
like 100th monkey stuff. Mice will learn stuff that other mice have learned. I mean, that's kind of some weird Akashic spiritual stuff. I don't know, but the science is pretty well understood, although the devil is in the details. So yeah, so things that we do to stay healthy and whatever, light, sound, love, all that can help keep it all good. But yeah, basically we're all just made up of cells that come from other cells, and yeah, nobody really understands too much.
So we have dysbiosis, which is now impacting the immune system. Now that the immune system is compromised, then now we're able to react a lot more strongly to all these toxins in our environment and other things in our environment, causing more dysbiosis and gut issues. And so it's almost like we're trapping ourselves in that cycle. And to your point, what is the root cause? Because there are so many root causes. And so if so many things are outside of our control, what could we control? What could we start with right now to actually start to maybe change some of these factors that are the most impactful?
Well, I'm kind of hypocritical because I greet the day with a donut and coffee. And
Oh boy.
the thing is, like, I was just on a podcast with a lady who had terrible celiac disease, which is gluten intolerance, not
Right.
just sensitivity. But yeah, I do have a patient, or actually a colleague that's treating 30 autistic kids a month. And the one thing she has them do is not take like a lot of bread or gluten,
Right.
because it just, whatever you're doing, it's going to make it worse, you
Right.
know? So she'll be treating the kids with exosomes, nasally IV. And she claims a 70% improvement in their behavior and their scores,
Mhm.
which is amazing. But the thing that I really want to highlight is if you are on the inflammatory spectrum, you've got mast cell issues, then probably eliminating a lot of these inflammatory foods are important. And it's not the same for everyone. You can get this ALCAT food sensitivity test, which may guide your decision making. But it sucks to have to live with an elimination diet.
Right.
But if I had to choose one or the other in terms of like vegan or vegetarian versus meat, probably the people who do more of the meat do a little better,
Right.
unfortunately. But
Yeah.
that's a great question. So diet, mindset, to getting out in nature, getting off your cell phones, don't doom scroll. Anything that makes you as a person happier and more abundant and grateful is going to help your immune system, because at the core of it, the immune system shuts down when you're stressed, right? And so that looks like high cortisol, decreased immune function, and then all the stuff is invited in, like all the opportunistic parasites and whatnot.
Yeah. Wow, such a good point. It's true. You can juice and do all the organic stuff and get the grass-fed beef, and but if your environment is very stressful and you're always being triggered by people around you or even things around you, you're always going to be compromised. So
That's
I think that's probably one of the most impactful things ever to share around how to really optimize your health. I love what you said, the things that just make you feel good, that bring you joy, that really help you regulate the nervous system. Very
for
powerful.
sure. For sure. And so we are kind of the masters of that. We're the quarterbacks, the captains. We can control that. So we can limit our exposure. The problem is that, a lot of people are in that sort of root chakra where they're danger. Like, and unfortunately, some of their social as they take on the sickness role, that becomes part of their identity. Like they get like all the secondary gain, attention, becomes their identity. And
Mm-hmm.
nowhere do we see this more with cancer patients. Once like a light switches when you get cancer. I mean, there's different kinds of cancer with different kinds of treatment and survival. But once you become a cancer patient, like it becomes part of your identity. And I think that people who do better in the long run are just the ones who treat it like another issue they have to resolve. And then once they resolve it, it's over.
Mm-hmm.
But I think identity is like the mind is constantly, unfortunately, dictating and orchestrating all these like disaster scenarios. So we got to get more back in our heart and be like grateful and grounded. And that's what life is all about anyway, enjoying that, not, you know. One patient who I know you're talking about mast cell activation, and it sounds like maybe you have some experience with that. If you read the book, you'll see incredible photos of a guy. I wrote this book called Exosomes, Songs of Healing. And people ask me, what's your best patient? This guy is like a 46-year-old Hungarian guy. And he photo documented over the first 2 weeks after, just a simple IV exosome injection, he must have healed his gut because I didn't really even believe in all this like gut leakiness. This guy went from having like eczema all over his hands, swelling in his face, um, spider veins,
Yeah.
and diarrhea, food intolerance to just being normal. And that was crazy. So the only explanation I could have was that he was eating food, the food was going directly in his blood system and just triggering this non-specific allergic reaction.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. And I think what you were talking about earlier in terms of just that component of how you're thinking becoming very addictive to some negative thoughts or taking on this identity depending on what disease you may be
Mhm.
diagnosed with. I think that's the mindset component that you're referring to. So you talked about diet, exercise, breathing, and then mindset as well being one of the pillars. Can you expand a little bit more on that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was giving a lecture 7, 8 years ago, and this guy, just a regular guy, said he had an app on his phone to remind him to breathe deeply every hour. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, wow, that's great. Because like so much of the day, we're kind of like in that whole future past mode, you
Yeah.
know, mitigating disasters but just to be able to breathe deeply automatically relaxes so much and can put so much in perspective. So, people often meditate and they feel like, oh, thoughts are just clouds passing or whatever. I don't personally meditate, but anything that gets you more into that sort of vagal, relaxed, restorative mode is key. And of course, I think maybe it's Dalai Lama who said sleep is the best meditation. So many people have this mindset like I'll sleep when I die, but they don't really understand. I had a acro, Cirque du Soleil acro yoga,
Mm-hmm.
this 34-year-old lady. She tumbles and does all this stuff, and she's like, I never dreamed. She just texted me this morning, I had this crazy dream that the exosomes you gave me were flowing through my body like a wave. And the point is, like, if you read this book, Telomere Miracle, it explains sleep architecture, and everyone's the same. Like, it's a lie that old people don't need sleep.
Right.
They do. And if we're doing it right, the first 2 or 3 cycles are deep wave sleep where the body's restoring, growth hormone, everything is fixing. But the last 2 to 4 cycles, you should be dreaming vividly. That's where your procedural memory, the meaning of everything is being rewritten in dreams. So
Mm-hmm.
it's super interesting just for that. I think it's a good read.
Super interesting. I'm definitely going to check that out. And as you're talking, I'm like, okay, so he has coffee and donuts for breakfast, and he swam this morning, fine, and he doesn't meditate, and then he looks like he's 25. All right,
I don't know
okay,
about that, but thank you. I'll take it.
okay, give it up. What is it? Tell me everything. How?
I mean,
What is
no,
your
it's just
routine?
that it was just no, that's it. I mean, I don't do a lot of healthy stuff. I should, and I hope to in the future. But really, just that telomerase activator, it's basically a molecule from a Chinese longevity herb, and they modify it slightly, probably. And it just, doubles or triples your telomerase activity. So all the stem cells in your body that want to have short telomeres mutate and die, it's just been slower in my case. That's it. For 17 years, I haven't taken like hormones or, any kind of supplements, not even vitamins.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, if you look at what I buy at the convenience store across the street, you'd be like, this dude should be dead. Like,
Oh no.
so, I mean, this is people don't want to hear that. They want to hear
Right.
like, oh, okay. So all the
Juicy.
stuff, even I came up with a mantra for gratitude before sleep, which I don't even practice anymore. And I don't think that I mean, it makes me a hypocrite, but someone might get value from it. I just create a list of 10 things you can do to get your mind set because the thoughts you have before your sleep are kind of like the theater you decide to go into at the multiplex. Are you going to go into like a comedy romantic musical or are you going to go into like a horror show, you know? So it's very important. That's why they always say don't go to bed mad at your spouse
Right.
because that'll rewrite some kind of other story. No,
Oh, super interesting.
yeah,
Okay, so you take the telomere activator,
that's it.
and so you shared with me earlier that at in your 30s you were obese, you had a
Hmm.
lot of health issues. You shared with me some photos with you and your son.
Can I share it? I don't know if it'll
Yeah, let's
recording.
share it.
All right,
And
here.
and anybody who's watching this on audio, if you jump on YouTube, you're gonna be able to see this because this is insane. This is really insane.
Yeah, so this is me a few weeks ago in New York on the right with my two sons, now 21, 25. Girlfriend I blocked out for privacy.
Hmm.
Anyways, and then if you go to the left, that's me in 2000, 7 years before telomerase activation. I was very obese, very stressed out, diabetes, fatty liver, 20, 30 pounds heavier, very sick. But
Yeah.
then at 3 months of taking the TA65 telomerase activator, I just lost a bunch of visceral fat, and that was a game changer. So throughout the years, here's me at 43, and then 49, and then here 56 last year with my mom, who has not been good about this telomerase activator, but she's taken 60 exosome shots, and she's 87, driving around, very productive, very intact at 87 now.
Wow.
So yeah, I think that people I go to these conferences with, they tout a lot of things but I think they're getting older. In fact, 5 people I met at the Revolution Against Aging and Dying Festival have died, which
Wow.
is, sad.
Wow. Okay, I have to ask.
Yeah,
So you started taking the activator and you changed nothing else to make
nada. No, no diet, no
you
exercise.
didn't so you went from diabetic and
Pre-diabetic, not
yeah,
really. I mean,
pre-diabetic and
yeah,
overweight
yeah,
to not changing your diet at all.
yeah.
Huh.
But what the way I understand it or explain it is it caused like the stem cells in your fat and my fat were old and senescent, and it caused an extinction event. So after 3 months, new cells were replaced with the old. See, like I said earlier at the very beginning, the daughters are only as old or sick as the moms. So
Right.
the visceral fat it's called the omentum. It's a fatty sheet
Hmm.
that lines your colon.
Hmm.
That stuff was old and inflamed and damaged. So it must have caused an extinction event that took 3 months to show up. Yeah,
Wow.
but people like they don't believe that. They're like, how could you lose weight without diet or exercise? I'm like, I don't, it's just biochemistry. It has nothing to do with my virtue or discipline.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And I love that you're so truthful and you're just saying it as it is. So I just want to honor you so much for that.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then the other thing is, so what other effects can we see from people starting to take this activator? So besides maybe
Yeah. I mean, they're
reducing
subtle.
some of the
Yeah.
symptoms.
Everyone's different. I have a million views on YouTube because for many years that's all we had. Over the last 5, 6 years, I've had exosomes, which can regrow stuff. That's like the Brahmin. This it causes your stem cells to get back with it, regrow cartilage, hair, everything. It's great. But so for the first 10 years, all I had was the telomerase activator. And it could be subtle, but I would say the main thing is vivid dreaming. If you take it at night,
Hmm.
like this acrobat that texted me, vivid dreaming, better skin quality, faster
Hmm.
nail growth. Almost everyone reports, oh, my hair and nails grow so fast.
Hmm.
Sometimes you get repigmentation. And I would say reading glasses for us folks over 40. I mean, I used to have to hold the book this far away, but now I can read 3 inches away. And it just makes that lens and the muscles work better, more plastic. So I would say probably the majority of people at a good dose will lose about a half a diopter. So if you're like a +2, you might go to +1.5. So those are all good things.
Hmm.
Other people have had certain help with autoimmune stuff. So I think it just kind of boosts up your immune system. I mean, if you want to understand the mechanism, there's scientific articles, but it's just generally a good tool to have.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think most people are familiar with PRP, right? So let's say regeneration, and depending, of course, on the extent of the injury, but regeneration, let's say, of knee cartilage or sometimes shoulder, depending. How is this different than what you're sharing and what you do? How is this different than what most of us have learned about stem cells?
Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, so if you pick up the book, there's a chapter 5 that explains this. So for about 20 to 30 years, people have been using prolotherapy and then PRP, which is a kind of prolotherapy. So prolo means proliferative, or basically they put like sugar in there,
Mm-hmm.
hypertonic sugar, and it caused, we think, cellular damage.
Mm-hmm.
So that damage brought in inflammation, which brought in stem cells to repair the inflammation. And the way they do that is by secreting these exosomes. Okay, so now we can just forget those first steps and just go to the exosomes. But PRP, likewise, they draw your blood, they spin it down in a kit. It's platelet-rich level of the plasma, and it has platelets in it, and the platelets have their own exosomes, but they tend to be very inflammatory.
Mm-hmm.
So they tell you can't take Motrin or Tylenol because they want inflammation.
Mm.
In my way of thinking, it's effective, but if something that you did PRP on, which is a little cheaper than exosomes, if that worked, then the exosomes would be much more effective and you don't have to go through the pain and the inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
So PRP is good, it's affordable, but it's hit or miss. Stem cells also hit or miss, depending on the quality and whatever. But the exosomes, in my experience, are just a little more predictable
Mm-hmm.
and they don't cause the inflammation. On the contrary, they shut down the inflammation rather quickly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it almost sounds like it's also more systemic, whereas PRP is very local, right? So you're putting it in one area,
Correct. Correct.
right?
Yeah. I mean, but for me personally, my practice, I inject it locally. So if you have a
Okay.
knee problem, like in the past, I would have done PRP or stem cells. I'll just put exosomes in there. So it's always better to get it in the spot where you need it because it's going to leak out. But that's true. PRP's effect is mainly locally because it causes that local inflammation, which then brings in the stem cells, which then secrete the exosomes.
Okay. And then what if we also talk a little bit about the placenta? So placental stem cells. I remember when I gave birth to my daughter, there was
Hmm.
this program I signed up on, and they kept the placenta, and it's something that we have just in case one day you need.
Yeah.
So again, how is that similar? How is that different than what you're researching and doing?
Yeah. So, I used to be OBGYN, so I've thrown thousands of placentas in the trash. So about 6 years ago, a lady who delivered at the University of Miami Cell Bank, she donated her placenta, and the scientists extracted the mesenchymal stem cells from that placenta. And then every 2, 3 months, they make a brand new batch from those original single donor cells. So they multiply them up to numbers, and then those secrete a bunch of exosomes. They filter and collect them. So there's a lot of misinformation, disinformation, obfuscation in this field. Basically, a placenta is, basically fetal tissue tied by an umbilical cord to the belly button of the baby,
Mhm.
right? So you can get it from the cord. It has slightly different epigenetic or different behaviors, but it's all placental tissue.
Mhm.
There's some people who make a lot of whether you got it from the cord part or whether you
Right.
got it from the placenta part. It's kind of not, I'm not sure that that's really valid. An MSC is an MSC, whether it's from a cord or placenta. There are some differences. Who knows if that makes a big difference? But I think we should just back up here, Sherry, and just say, what is a stem cell? Like
Yeah.
throughout your body, from birth till death, you get a paper cut, you get a third-degree burn. There are MSCs, which are mesenchymal stem cells, lining the blood vessels. And when they sense there's a danger, they go into activity. And I used to say, and I made a mistake in my first book that I self-published, that the stem cells, telomere time bombs, the stem cells will go out and become something. They might not. The reason we think that is because stem cell scientists can take an MSC, and it's how they prove they have an MSC, add a few chemicals, and it'll become bone or muscle or something else, right? So
Mhm.
they're like, oh, but they say, well, that maybe doesn't happen in the body. I don't think so. If you can do it in the lab, Mother Nature can do it. But it's really controversial whether they engraft, whether the stem cells in your sprained ankle or your paper cut become tissue.
Mhm.
More likely, the founder and the guy who named the MSC, Arnold Kaplan, who died last year, he says you don't even need the stem cells. It's just the exosomes is how they work.
Wow.
So they send out these invisible, literally 100 nanometer invisible little spheres, and they have mRNA and proteins to reprogram the cells so that you can heal. So this, even though it's not FDA approved, this is how you are healing from birth till death, same mechanism. And because they come from another person, you might think there's a problem, but at 100 nanometers in this particular manufacturing process, there's no self antigens, which is the problem with stem cells.
Hmm.
If your daughter 40 years from now needs something and the science is so much better, she can thaw out a portion of the placenta, maybe grow some kidney or whatever she needs, because that's a perfect genetic match. But when you take an off-the-shelf stem cell from someone else, there's something called major histocompatibility complex antigens, which is why tissue needs to be matched. Even though it's matched, it'll still get rejected. It's like a really fine combination that if it doesn't match, your body will basically kill those stem cells if it's competent within 3 to 4 days. But during those 3 or 4 days, you're making exosomes, which is great. But that's the rub. You can't really expect someone else's stem cells to survive because they're big. They're 3 to 5 microns, whereas these tiny exosomes are 100 nanometers. So whenever you thaw it, they should be totally clear and invisible.
Wow.
Because even with the best light microscope in the world, you can't see anything below 200 nanometers. So they're literally invisible. Yeah.
Oh, so fascinating. And I have to say one thing I really appreciate about our conversation, and even just again watching your episode on Gaia, is how you tie in spirituality with so much science, and I'm really curious about that. Super fascinating. How do you marry the two? And it's very clear that that's also something that's very important to you. So where does that come from?
Oh, I mean, as a divorced person, maybe marriage doesn't have the same significance as it does in others. But I mean, I don't really consider myself a very theistic person. I don't consider myself an atheistic person. I just, if certain phenomenon occur and, they're reproducible, then it would be ignorant of me to deny that. That's all. So I just look at it as a phenomenon.
Wow.
If it happens, then who am I to say it didn't happen? Like I've had over this year, there's a lot of people who've told me about their past lives.
Mhm.
So, my shaman, who I told you designed this, my friend who's a shaman,
Yeah.
he's so funny, but she's like, "Oh, I can tell you about your past life." So do we really want to know? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. But I think to assume that your way of understanding the universe is always going to be correct is probably not very efficient. So I just don't want to be wrong. I want to know more.
Right.
So I'm very gullible. Like I'll spend 6 hours learning about flat Earth, you know, but then, I'm also very skeptical. So I think that's efficient to be open-minded, but then also very critical. So I
Mhm.
don't think the Earth is flat.
Yeah. I would term that curiosity.
Yeah, you just
Open-minded and critical, like just bringing both, like the curiosity and the analytical mind to it. It's very
for sure.
beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much more in terms of I've been blogging a lot about synchronicity.
Hmm.
If they go to my website, they can sign up for the blog. And some people it's a big turnoff because they're all in their heads and they're like, why are you even talking about this? But I think it's interesting. Like all the people you meet, you have such an influence on them. You don't even know, and you can change their lives. So why not leverage that? But
Right.
people just spend their lives so much in their blinders trying to make some goal happen and suffering. And it's just like, it should be much more fun to enjoy life, right? But we're all guilty of it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Happens so easily. Wow, this was such an amazing conversation. I feel like I could continue to pick your brain. I have to tell you, I've learned a lot from you already
Thank you.
today. And how does somebody work with you? So if somebody is listening
Oh,
in
yeah.
today and they're super curious about, some of these things. I think I shared with you, for me, I've had surgery on my back twice. I've had partial laminectomies, and this is something that I also want to consider doing because
Yeah,
every
yeah.
now and then I'll get a flare up, and I'm a very active person, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
as I'm aging, I'm starting to feel those limitations. So how could we reach out and start to work with you?
Yeah, yeah. So thank you. I have a book, fourth time now, Exosome Songs of Healing. It's an audiobook. Also, you can go to rechargebiomedical.com, sign up for the newsletter. I blog usually every week. And on YouTube, it's DRPARK65. I've got dozens of videos, and they could just learn more. If they want to have a consult, they live in one of the 6 states where I practice: California, Texas, Florida, New York, Hawaii, Utah. Then I can come to them. But basically, they can just go to rechargebiomedical.com, ask a question, or they can schedule a free Zoom consult and we can chat about that. So those are the main
Amazing.
ways. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, and we're going to
Yeah.
add all of that to our show notes. And
Right.
just as we sign off today, was there anything else that you wanted to share, Ed, or drop before we conclude?
No, I just think people should, I mean, be open-minded yet skeptical. I mean, the biggest problem I have, my biggest asset is people who've been helped because 70% of my patients are repeat. You fix their shoulder, they're like, come back, fix my knee. But I think, for every person that's helped, they'll tell 20 people, not even one will even look at it.
Right.
So keep an open mind. No one's asking you to write a check, just keep an open mind. This stuff hopefully will be FDA approved. There's like at least a dozen trials, and then doctors can use it off label, So hopefully it'll be coming soon to you. Um, if you don't want to pay for it or can't afford it now, it doesn't mean that it's not valid. A lot of people have that sour grapes attitude. So it never hurts, like me in the flat earth, to open your mind and think about it. You don't have to believe in it. You don't have to spend money on it. But that's my invitation to everyone. It's just have an open mind. Because, I go to these conferences with all these experts. They're getting older. Some are dying. Nobody has all the answers. They might have something to sell you, but nobody has all the answers. So it's important to keep an open mind because we're not talking about science fiction here. I mean, I did write a science fiction graphic novel. That was the first thing I did when I had my midlife crisis. I wrote this amazing graphic novel
Wow.
about immortality, but nobody has all the answers. But the science is not esoteric. It's very easily understood. What is a stem cell? How can we bank our stem cells like for your daughter? How will we use them in the future? Like this is not like even like fracking or like isotope carbon dating. This is very easy to understand. I invite you to just take a look and understand. Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you so much. That was so well said, and thanks for all your wisdom, and thanks for all the work that you do, and the innovation that you bring to us. And this was a really enlightening conversation. I loved it.
Shukran, Habibti.
Shukran.
Okay. See you later.